In the glittering world of high-stakes politics and old money, some lessons come at a devastating price. When billionaire Michael Crawford laughed at J.D. Vance's Appalachian roots during a live TV debate, he had no idea how quickly the tables would turn. Comment where you're watching from today, as we dive into one of the most dramatic confrontations in recent political history. The prestigious Washington studio buzzed with anticipation that evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the mahogany-paneled walls, while makeup artists made their final touches on the guests. Among them sat Michael Crawford, heir to the Crawford Industries fortune, his Italian suit perfectly pressed, his silver cufflinks catching the studio lights. But it was the other figure that drew curious glances. Vance, dressed in a simple navy suit, carried himself with quiet confidence that seemed to unsettle the billionaire beside him. The tension began to build as soon as the moderator, Richard Espinosa, opened the discussion about economic inequality in America. Crawford's practiced smile barely masked his contempt as he turned to face Vance. "You know, Richard, it's amusing when people like Mr. Vance here pretend to understand the complexities of global economics. Having read his little story about growing up in the hills, I wonder if he's ever seen the inside of a proper boardroom." The studio fell silent. Crawford's words hung in the air like smoke, but Vance's expression remained unchanged. The cameras caught every micro-expression as Crawford continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I mean, it's charming, really. The whole hillbilly makes good narrative. But we're talking about serious economic policy here, not some feel-good story about climbing out of poverty." What Crawford didn't realize was that his words were doing more than just filling airtime. They were digging his own grave. The studio audience shifted uncomfortably as he pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the changing atmosphere. "Let me explain something simple, something they might not teach in the hollows of Kentucky. Real wealth, real power, it comes from generations of understanding. It's not something you can learn from a library book in between helping your grandmother with her disability checks." Vance listened patiently, his hands folded calmly in his lap. The studio lights seemed to intensify as Crawford leaned forward, warming to his theme. "I've built international conglomerates while Mr. Vance was probably still learning which fork to use at dinner. These are the people who should be shaping economic policy, not someone whose claim to fame is writing about food stamps and family dysfunction." The shift began when Douglas Mitchell, the veteran producer, stepped into view of the cameras, whispering something to the moderator. Richard Espinosa's eyes widened slightly as he glanced down at his tablet, then back at Crawford. The billionaire was still talking, unaware of the impending revelation. "You see, Richard, what people like Mr. Vance don't understand is that true success requires a certain pedigree. You can't just walk in from the backwoods and dash." "Mr. Crawford," Espinosa interrupted, his voice carrying a note of barely concealed satisfaction. "I believe you might be interested in some breaking news. Your company's board of directors has been watching this broadcast, and they've just released a statement. Would you like me to read it?" The color drained from Crawford's face as Espinosa continued. "It seems that while you've been here questioning Mr. Vance's economic expertise, your board has been reviewing some rather interesting transactions. Transactions that Mr. Vance, as part of the Senate Banking Committee's investigation team, uncovered just this morning." The studio erupted in murmurs as Crawford's perfectly manicured hands began to tremble. Vance finally spoke, his voice steady and clear. "You know, Mr. Crawford, back in the hills we have a saying, the loudest rooster in the barnyard isn't always the one who knows when the sun's really rising." Keith Morris, Crawford Industries' chief legal officer, could be seen rushing into the studio, but it was too late. The damage was done. Crawford's attempted interruption was cut short as Espinosa revealed the full scope of the investigation, hundreds of millions in questionable offshore accounts, all traced back to Crawford's personal directives. "Sometimes," Vance continued, "the best education comes from watching your mother count pennies at the grocery store. It teaches you the real value of money, and more importantly, the value of integrity. Something that, apparently, can't be inherited along with a trust fund." As Crawford was hurriedly ushered off the set by his legal team, Vance delivered the final blow with characteristic grace. "I may have grown up learning which wild berries were safe to eat when times were tough, Mr. Crawford, But at least I never had to learn how to hide money from the American people you claim to understand so well. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Crawford's empire began to crumble within hours, while social media exploded with clips of his condescending remarks juxtaposed with the revelation of his financial misdeeds. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when the cameras caught Vance's quiet response to a producer's question after the show. "Success isn't about where you come from," he said, straightening his simple tie. "It's about remembering where you come from and making sure you never become what you once fought against." Have you ever been underestimated because of your background? Share your story in the comments below. Remember, true character isn't inherited, it's built through adversity and maintained through integrity. The morning after the explosive TV confrontation, the marble halls of Crawford Industries headquarters echoed with urgent footsteps. Michael Crawford's world was unraveling faster than his PR team could spin damage control narratives. But what the disgraced billionaire didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a story that would reshape America's conversation about class, privilege, and power. Behind the scenes, a complex web of connections began to emerge. Lauren Stevens, a former employee who had been dismissed when she raised concerns about financial irregularities, stepped forward with a damning testimony. Mr. Crawford didn't just mock J.D. Vance's background, she revealed to investigative reporter Michelle Hammond. He systematically targeted and removed employees who came from working-class backgrounds, claiming they didn't understand the culture of excellence he was trying to build. The investigation expanded as Bradley Quinn, Crawford's former chief financial officer, broke his silence. The prejudice ran deep, he explained during a closed-door Senate hearing. Crawford maintained what he called a legacy list. Candidates from wealthy families were fast-tracked for executive positions, while employees from modest backgrounds were relegated to dead-end roles, regardless of their qualifications. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance's quiet dignity in the face of Crawford's arrogance had struck a chord across the nation. Social media exploded with similar stories of class discrimination in corporate America. William Nielsen, a successful tech entrepreneur from rural Mississippi, shared his own experience. "I was told to take accent reduction classes if I wanted to advance. They said my southern drawl made investors uncomfortable." Watching Vance stand his ground reminded me why we can't let them shame us into hiding our roots. The story took an unexpected turn when Jennifer Hoffman, Crawford's executive assistant of 15 years, came forward with a series of recordings. In them, Crawford could be heard mocking not just Vance, but an entire segment of American society. "These people think education and hard work will make them one of us," his voice sneered in one particularly damaging clip. "They don't understand that some doors will always remain closed to coal miners' children." As the recording circulated, Crystal Anderson, a prominent social psychologist, provided context on national news. "What we're seeing is the exposure of a deeply entrenched system of class-based discrimination." Crawford's mistake wasn't just attacking J.D. Vance. It was accidentally pulling back the curtain on beliefs that usually remain unspoken in corporate America. The ripple effects reached beyond Crawford Industries. Angela Powell, a senior analyst at Global Investment Weekly, noted a significant shift in corporate governance discussions. Companies are suddenly scrambling to review their hiring and promotion practices. Nobody wants to be the next Crawford Industries. The phrase, culture fit, is being recognized for what it often is, a euphemism for class discrimination. J.D. Vance's response to the growing scandal remained measured. When Christopher Edwards of the National Business Review asked for his comment, Vance's reply was characteristic of his approach. "This isn't about one man's prejudice. It's about acknowledging that talent, intelligence, and leadership ability don't belong exclusively to any one background." The kid whose mother worked double shifts at the diner might understand more about economic reality than someone who's never worried about a bill in their life. The investigation into Crawford Industries revealed deeper patterns. Raymond Murphy, a data analyst, compiled statistics showing how the company had systematically excluded qualified candidates from working-class backgrounds. "The numbers are staggering," he reported. 97% of their executive team came from the top 1% of American wealth, despite having a pool of highly qualified candidates from diverse economic backgrounds. Crawford's attempt to rehabilitate his image backfired spectacularly. In an interview with veteran journalist Patricia Vincent, his condescension only became more apparent. "Look, I apologize if my words seemed harsh," he said, "but you have to understand the realities of global business. It takes a certain breeding to understand these matters." The interview was cut short when Vincent, herself the daughter of a factory worker, removed her microphone and walked off set. The story took another turn when Elizabeth Lawrence, a prominent anthropologist, published a study on corporate language and class markers. What Crawford expressed openly is usually conveyed through subtle linguistic codes, she explained. Terms like "not executive material" or "lacking polish" often serve as proxies for class-based discrimination. As pressure mounted, Crawford's allies began to distance themselves. Robert Manning, a fellow billionaire and longtime friend, publicly criticized Crawford's attitudes. "Success doesn't come with a birth certificate," Manning stated. "Some of the most brilliant business minds I know came from humble beginnings." Crawford's attitude represents everything wrong with old money thinking. The scandal prompted Gerald Flores, chair of the Senate Committee on Banking, to launch a broader investigation into hiring practices across major corporations. What began with one billionaire's unguarded moment has exposed systemic issues we can no longer ignore, Flores announced. "The American dream cannot be reserved for those born into privilege." Crawford's empire continued to crumble as investors pulled out and board members resigned. Diana Garza, a senior market analyst, observed, "We're watching the real-time collapse of a business philosophy that should have died out decades ago. The market is sending a clear message. Discrimination based on social class is not just morally wrong, it's bad for business." Meanwhile, stories of Crawford's past behavior continued to emerge. Michael Castro, a former Harvard classmate, shared an illuminating anecdote. Even in college, he kept a literal list of people he considered new money or scholarship cases. He would warn others not to associate too closely with them. It was disturbing then, and it's disturbing now. The national conversation shifted as more successful individuals from working-class backgrounds shared their experiences. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a renowned surgeon who grew up in a trailer park, spoke out, "Every step of my career, I encountered people like Crawford. They assumed my background meant I couldn't possibly understand complex issues. Their prejudice said more about their limitations than mine." As the week progressed, Crawford's television appearance became a catalyst for change in unexpected ways. Dennis Johnson, a corporate diversity consultant, reported a surge in companies requesting training specifically focused on class diversity. Organizations are finally recognizing that diversity isn't just about visible differences, it's about bringing together people with different life experiences and perspectives. The impact reached academia as well. Dr. Rebecca Norris, dean of a prestigious business school, announced major changes to their admissions process. "We've been unconsciously perpetuating the very biases that Mr. Crawford displayed so brazenly. That ends now. Success in business shouldn't depend on whether your parents belonged to the right country club." Through it all, J.D. Vance's quiet dignity continued to resonate. When asked by reporter Gregory Young about Crawford's ongoing attempts to discredit him, Vance replied, "Every time he speaks, he proves my point. True leadership isn't about where you came from, it's about what you've learned along the way and how you use that knowledge to help others." The story hit home for many Americans who had faced similar prejudices. Benjamin Murray, a successful entrepreneur from rural Alabama, started a mentorship program specifically for promising business students from working-class backgrounds. "Watching Crawford's attitude get exposed inspired me to do something concrete about this issue," he explained. "We need to actively break down these invisible barriers." As the second week of the scandal began, Crawford's position became increasingly untenable. The board of directors, led by newly appointed chairwoman Michelle Flores, announced a complete overhaul of the company's corporate culture. "We're not just changing policies," she declared. "We're changing the fundamental assumptions about what makes someone qualified to lead." The contrast between Crawford's desperate attempts to maintain control and Vance's composed strength became a powerful symbol of changing times. As social commentator Christine Thomas noted, in trying to dismiss someone he saw as beneath him, Crawford instead revealed himself as a relic of an era that America has outgrown. Have you witnessed or experienced class discrimination in your professional life? Share your story in the comments below. Together, we can continue exposing and challenging these deep-rooted prejudices that hold back talented individuals from achieving their full potential. 3 weeks after the infamous TV confrontation, what began as a moment of exposed prejudice had evolved into a national movement. The Crawford scandal had opened a floodgate, and stories of class discrimination were pouring out from every corner of corporate America. But no one could have predicted how the next phase of this story would unfold. Kevin Schultz, a data journalist at the National Economic Review, published a groundbreaking investigation. Crawford Industries wasn't an anomaly, his report revealed. We've uncovered similar legacy lists at 12 other Fortune 500 companies. The revelation sent shockwaves through Wall Street as companies scrambled to audit their hiring practices before they became the next headline. The movement gained unexpected momentum when Philip Chin, a self-made tech billionaire, stepped forward. I've sat in rooms where people like Crawford casually dismissed brilliant candidates because they didn't summer in the Hamptons. Chen testified before the Senate Banking Committee. I stayed quiet then. That silence made me complicit, and it ends today. Meanwhile, Crawford's desperate attempts to salvage his reputation led to more damaging revelations. Angela Bonilla, a former HR director at Crawford Industries, released internal memos showing systematic discrimination. It wasn't just unspoken bias, she explained to investigative reporter Howard Higgins. They had actual coded language in their hiring guidelines. Regional accent was an automatic disqualification. First-generation professional was a red flag. The story took an unexpected turn when Daniel Carson, Crawford's college roommate, came forward with historical context. Michael's attitudes weren't formed in a vacuum, he explained. His father, Richard Crawford Sr., literally had a saying, "You can't buy class, and you can't teach it either." They believed leadership was genetic, passed down through good breeding, like they were talking about racehorses. The investigation expanded beyond Crawford Industries when Stephanie Ruiz, a prominent labor attorney, filed a class action lawsuit. We've identified patterns of systematic class discrimination across multiple industries, she announced. Companies used everything from golf club memberships to vacation preferences as proxies for class background in their promotion decisions. J.D. Vance's response to these developments remained characteristically measured. When asked by journalist Laura Pierce about the growing scandal, he replied, "This was never about one man's prejudice. It's about dismantling a system that wastes American talent because of outdated notions of who belongs in the boardroom." The movement gained further momentum when Rachel Hall, a prominent executive coach, released recordings from her corporate training sessions. "I was hired to teach people how to executive presence," she revealed. But what they really wanted was to erase any trace of working-class background from their rising stars. They were literally trying to teach people to be ashamed of where they came from. Crawford's world continued to crumble as more former associates turned against him. Brandon Palmer, his former chief strategy officer, published a scathing memoir titled The Cost of Class. Michael didn't just believe in superiority, Palmer wrote. He built entire business strategies around excluding people he considered new money or scholarship cases from key decisions. The impact reached academia when Dr. Kelly Mayo, a sociology professor, published a comprehensive study on class mobility in corporate America. What the Crawford case exposed isn't just individual bias, she explained. It's a sophisticated system of class preservation disguised as meritocracy. The data shows that qualified candidates from working-class backgrounds face barriers at every level of corporate advancement. The story took another turn when Julia Boyer, a rising star at a competing firm, resigned publicly in protest. "I was told to tone down my background as a waitress's daughter if I wanted to make partner," she announced. "Watching J.D. Vance stand his ground made me realize I don't want to succeed in a system that requires me to be ashamed of my mother's honest work." The national conversation shifted dramatically when Ronald Cantrell, a prominent business school dean, admitted to institutional bias. "We've been teaching leadership through a lens of inherited privilege," he acknowledged. Our case studies predominantly feature people from wealthy backgrounds. We've been unconsciously reinforcing the very prejudices that Crawford displayed so openly. As the scandal widened, more successful individuals from working-class backgrounds began sharing their stories. Natalie Molina, a self-made tech entrepreneur, launched a viral LinkedIn post. "I used to hide that my first job was cleaning houses with my mother. Crawford's downfall taught me that our backgrounds aren't liabilities, they're assets that give us unique perspectives on leadership." The movement gained additional momentum when Wesley Paul, a veteran Wall Street analyst, published an expose on informal hiring networks. "The culture fit interviews aren't really about culture," he revealed. "They're about identifying candidates who share the same privileged background. It's discrimination dressed up as corporate compatibility." Crawford's attempts to defend himself only made things worse. In a disastrous interview with journalist Heather Craig, he argued, "Some people are just born understanding business. You can't expect someone who grew up watching their parents clip coupons to grasp high-level financial strategy." The clip went viral, becoming a symbol of the very prejudice the movement was fighting against. The impact reached beyond corporate America when Michelle Day, a high school career counselor, shared her experiences. "I've had brilliant students discouraged from pursuing business careers because they didn't have the right background," she revealed. Crawford just said out loud what these kids have been hearing subtly their whole lives. The story took an unexpected turn when Alexander Kennedy, a wealthy investor known for his conservative views, publicly sided with Vance. "I watched my grandfather build a fortune from nothing," he stated. Crawford's attitude isn't just morally wrong, it's historically ignorant. American business was built by people who started with nothing but grit and determination. The investigation uncovered deeper patterns when Kristen Walsh, a corporate anthropologist, published research on linguistic discrimination. "Companies aren't just judging candidates on class markers," she explained. "They're actively training employees to eliminate any trace of their working-class origins from their speech and behavior. It's a form of cultural erasure." As pressure mounted, more companies began implementing reforms. Melinda Andrews, CEO of a major consulting firm, announced sweeping changes. "We're not just eliminating bias from our hiring processes. We're actively seeking out candidates whose diverse life experiences can make us stronger." The era of country club credentials is over. The movement reached a turning point when Jason Sampson, a prominent venture capitalist, launched a fund specifically for entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds. "Talent doesn't have a zip code," he declared. "Some of the most innovative business solutions come from people who had to be resourceful their whole lives." Throughout these developments, J.D. Vance's initial composure in the face of Crawford's contempt continued to inspire others. When asked by reporter Vincent Dean about the growing movement, Vance reflected, "This isn't about revenge or resentment. It's about building a business world that recognizes talent and potential can come from any background. The next great American innovation might come from a coal miner's daughter or a janitor's son." The story had become larger than either Crawford or Vance. As social commentator Donna Fisher noted, what began as one billionaire's moment of exposed prejudice has become a catalyst for examining deep-rooted assumptions about who belongs in positions of power. The question isn't just about Crawford's individual bias anymore. It's about what kind of business world we want to build for the next generation. Have you ever felt pressured to hide your background to succeed professionally? Share your experience in the comments below. It's time to recognize that our diverse origins are strengths, not limitations, in the business world. 6 months after the television confrontation that changed American business culture, the ripple effects had transformed into a tidal wave of reform. The final chapter of this story would prove that sometimes, the most powerful changes come from moments of accidental honesty. The morning began with shocking news. Michael Crawford, once the embodiment of inherited privilege, was stepping down from his remaining board positions. But it was his parting letter, read by his attorney Nicholas Donovan, that captured the nation's attention. "I've spent my life believing that success was a birthright," Crawford wrote. "Recent events have forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. My prejudices haven't just hurt others, they've limited my own understanding of what true leadership means." The transformation extended far beyond Crawford Industries. Anthony Cooper, CEO of Global Investments Weekly, published a groundbreaking analysis. In the 6 months since the Crawford-Vance incident, companies with diverse class representation in leadership positions have outperformed their peers by an average of 27%. The data was undeniable. Diversity of experience wasn't just morally right, it was good for business. Lauren Jackson, a prominent organizational psychologist, conducted a comprehensive study of the changes sweeping through corporate America. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how companies define leadership potential, she reported. The country club test has been replaced by what some are calling the resilience factor, valuing candidates who have overcome significant obstacles. The movement gained unexpected support when Douglas Richardson, a third-generation banking executive, launched an initiative called Beyond Background. "I've been part of the problem," he admitted during the launch event. "I used to think my privileged upbringing made me a better leader. Watching J.D. Vance handle Crawford's attacks with such dignity showed me what real leadership looks like." Meanwhile, the transformation of Crawford Industries continued under its new CEO, Melissa Nelson. "We're not just changing policies," she announced. "We're fundamentally reimagining what corporate success looks like. Our new board includes a former factory worker who earned his MBA at night, a first-generation immigrant who built a tech empire, and a former coal miner's daughter who revolutionized green energy." The story took an unexpected turn when Bradley Bender, a prominent business school professor, revealed the results of a 10-year study. Companies led by executives from working-class backgrounds showed consistently better crisis management skills, he explained. Growing up with economic uncertainty develops resilience and problem-solving abilities that no amount of privilege can teach. J.D. Vance's influence continued to grow, but not in the way many expected. Rather than leveraging his newfound fame for personal gain, he launched the American Dream Initiative. "This isn't about replacing one form of privilege with another," he explained to reporter Christina Clark. "It's about creating a business world where success is truly based on merit, innovation, and character." The movement reached a crucial milestone when Sharon Benjamin, a leading executive recruiter, announced a complete overhaul of corporate hiring practices. "We've eliminated all questions about family background, private school affiliations, and social club memberships," she declared. "We're focusing on what candidates have achieved, especially in the face of adversity." The transformation was particularly evident in the tech sector, where Caleb Flores, a prominent venture capitalist, launched a fund specifically for entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds. "Some of the most innovative solutions come from people who had to be resourceful their whole lives," he noted. "We're not just funding businesses, we're investing in perspective." The story's impact reached education when Dr. Rebecca Shannon announced major changes to MBA admissions criteria. "We've been unconsciously favoring candidates who had privileged access to early business exposure," she acknowledged. "Now we're recognizing that running a family food truck can teach more about real business than a summer internship arranged by family connections." The corporate culture shift became evident when Angela Powell, now leading diversity initiatives at a major consulting firm, shared her observations. "The language has changed," she noted. "Terms like polish and refinement have been replaced by adaptability and resilience. We're finally valuing substance over style." Crawford's former allies continued to distance themselves, but none more dramatically than Richard Moore, who transformed his family's foundation to focus on economic mobility. "For generations, we've been part of a system that confused privilege with potential," he admitted. "The events of the past 6 months have shown us the cost of that mistake." The movement gained additional momentum when Michelle Hammond, a prominent business journalist, published The New American Business, chronicling the transformation. "What began with one billionaire's moment of exposed prejudice," she wrote, "has evolved into the most significant shift in corporate culture since the digital revolution." The impact reached Wall Street when Jennifer Hoffman, a leading fund manager, announced a new investment strategy focusing on companies with class-diverse leadership. "The data is clear," she explained. "Companies that embrace true diversity of experience consistently outperform those clinging to old notions of pedigree." Throughout these changes, J.D. Vance's approach remained consistent. When asked by Keith Morris about the ongoing transformation, he reflected, "Success in business, like success in life, isn't about where you started. It's about how well you understand real people's needs and how committed you are to meeting them." The story took another significant turn when Crystal Anderson, a social impact researcher, released a study on the economic effects of class diversity in leadership. Companies with executives from working-class backgrounds showed 40% better cost management and 35% higher employee satisfaction, she reported. They're more attuned to operational efficiency and workforce needs. The transformation reached Silicon Valley when Philip Russell, a prominent tech CEO, mandated blind background screening for all hiring. "We realized we were missing out on incredible talent because of unconscious bias about class markers," he explained. "Now we're seeing candidates for who they are, not where they came from." The movement's influence extended to startup culture, where Rachel Brewer launched an accelerator program specifically for entrepreneurs from working-class backgrounds. "Innovation doesn't care about your family tree," she declared. "Some of the most disruptive ideas come from people who had to think differently their whole lives." As the year drew to a close, the contrast between old and new business culture became stark. Daniel Carson, a corporate historian, observed, "We're witnessing the end of an era where social class determined corporate success. The new generation of leaders is being valued for their experiences, not their expectations." The transformation was perhaps best illustrated when Crawford Industries announced its new executive training program, led by Michelle Day. "We're not just teaching business skills," she explained. "We're learning from our employees' diverse life experiences. Every background brings valuable perspective to the table." Looking back on the year of change, social commentator Andrea White reflected, "What Crawford intended as an insult became a catalyst for transformation. His attempt to shame J.D. Vance's background instead exposed the bankruptcy of old money thinking and sparked a revolution in how we define business leadership." In the end, it was J.D. Vance's quiet dignity that continued to resonate. When asked about his role in sparking this transformation, he remained characteristically humble. "Real change happens when we stop trying to fit into someone else's notion of success and start recognizing the unique value of our own journey. Every background has its lessons. Every struggle builds strength. And every American deserves the chance to turn their experience into excellence." Has this story changed how you think about success and leadership? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, your background isn't a barrier, it's part of what makes you uniquely qualified to lead.